Anyway, of course, I'm going to move on. I'm going to be, of course, talking about the history of Mesopotamia. Mostly, I will be talking about the big people, big cultures that are there, like the Babylonian one, Assyrian one. That's going to be the big ones I'll talk about. And I'll also kind of get into and start also talking about I'll talk a little about the Hittites and a few other minor groups that were also there as well. Let me go ahead and get into, of course, some of our other lecture material that we have not gotten into yet, of course, at this point. We haven't really talked about the Babylonians much. I think we last class we had talked about pretty much mostly the Sumerian culture, because Sumerian culture was the dominant culture of Mesopotamia that influenced all the other cultures, later that they had. And then I briefly talked about the Akkadian culture, Akkadian Empire that came in. And they conquered Mesopotamia, and the two cultures merged to like this Akkadian Sumerian culture, which was briefly, I told you, the Akkadian Empire under King Sargon. That collapsed. And then out of that, I told you Mesopotamia split into two groups, which were the two spheres, really. Northern Iraq or Mesopotamia became known as Assyria, and the southern part became known as Babylonia. Well, Babylonia, the one we're talking about, would have this empire that would emerge there in the 18th century BC that was called the Babylonian Empire. It's got all kinds of names. It's sometimes called the Paleo-Babylonian Empire or the Old Babylonian Empire. See, somebody will even call it the Hammurabi's Empire, I think, as well, because he was the famous king of it, like you saw in the video. But they call it that because there's a later empire that's called the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and that's the one you may have heard of that was ruled by King Nebuchadnezzar, which I'll talk about later about. I've got a few notes in there added to this slide right here. The capital was Babylon, which is why they called it Babylonia later. Although there's a debate about how the name came about. Some believe that the name Babylon originated from the Greeks, like when Alexander the Great conquered Mesopotamia. And I believe that the name Babylon originated from a Greek word, which was Babylon. And then, of course, some people think it comes from Hebrew, which is the word Babel, which is the word confusion. Because you remember the story about the Tower of Babel, about how God made all the workers speak different languages so they couldn't complete it. And so I think they think that maybe the Israelites may have been one of the groups that may have originally coined the name a long time ago. They're a collection of people, the Babylonians. They're a mix of two groups, mostly Akkadian stock, which I told you are Akkadian Sumerian, that took over Mesopotamia. Then there was another group that was called the Amorite peoples. The Amorites were these Semitic peoples that came from somewhere in the northern part of Mesopotamia. It's kind of a debate about where they came from. It says the east, but they think they came maybe out of Syria, like maybe over here where it says Mari in the upper Euphrates Valley. They came down, they took over Babylon, and it's believed that most of the kings of Babylonia were of Amorite origin. They think Hammurabi was, of course, himself an Amorite king. Hammurabi was like one of 12 kings that ruled over the Babylonians during that time. He was their greatest ruler, and he reigned in the 18th century BC. And he's pretty much the one that conquered all that territory that you're looking at in the map, which included Babylonia and I guess Sumer and Akkad, which were up in here at one point. And then what would be like part of Assyria in the north. So that's the bulk of the region. And yeah, maybe 792 may have been about, when it started roughly, but that's kind of a questionable date about when it was. Now, of course, Hammurabi is mostly known for his legal code. Of course, that now bears its name, which it's called either Code of Hammurabi or Hammurabi Code. So it's called either one. The codes were believed to have been developed in the early 18th century BC. I think maybe they're thinking like maybe 1770s BC might have been when it was founded. And the law codes, which they've, of course, later found and have translated from Akkadian cuneiform, had a total of 282 laws inscribed on them. 282 laws. And most of the laws of the Hammurabi Code, if you know about it, were considered one of the first major legal codes in history. It influenced a lot of other legal codes later, like the Persian Empire. Their law codes were heavily influenced by Hammurabi's code. Of course, the Bible, I think y'all had mentioned earlier about the the Bible being a source of that. Like they believe like the laws of Moses and the 10 Commandments, may have been influenced by it, because of the idea of like the eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That appears in the Bible as well. So that's definitely something that's a big influence, of course, later. They only have one they found, of course, of a Hammurabi code. It's called a stele, which is a type of stone pillar. It's made of some kind of black stone that it was carved in. And the original one, of course, they found is now in the Louvre in Paris, France. And they found it in 1901, archaeologists in what is southern Iran, near the city of what is called Susa, or the ruins of Susa. And on the top of it, it's got some kind of image in it that's it's got like King Hammurabi sitting on his throne. And then there's a god that's in the image, which they believe is the god Shamash. Shamash was some type of Sumerian god originally, also called Utu, U-T-U, Utu, which was it was a solar god or sun god of the Sumerians originally. It was also a god of justice. So it was a god that the Babylonians adopted. And in the image, it's kind of seen where supposedly the god is giving the laws to Hammurabi. I guess is what the Babylonians believed, kind of like the Israelites or Jews later believed that God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. So it's kind of like almost like the same thing with that. What else about the Hammurabi Code? Now, of course, the one thing about the laws, about the code, I'm trying to think what else I have about it. The code itself, the laws are based off of like I said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, which was often called like a law of retaliation, or what we call equal justice. So somebody took out your eye, you had a right to take their eye out, or tooth, or whatever it is. And I've got a lot of examples of codes, different law codes you can see there that are in it. A lot of them are like based off of different things. It could be anything from crimes committed to perjury, divorce, business agreements, just about anything in the code. There was something that they had that was connected to legal laws. And like 195, a son strikes his father, his hand shall be cut off. If he breaks another man's bone, his bone shall be broken. If anyone strike the body of a man higher in his rank, he shall receive 60 blows with an ox whip in public. So it's different ones. If a slave says to his master, you are not my master, if they convict him, his master shall cut off his ear. Just reading a few of those. Of course, the ones on the bottom you see are added in there. 196 and 200, of course, are the most famous that are in the Hammurabi Code, which are the eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth, which are copied in the Bible also as well. So they think the Hammurabi Code was written before the Bible. So it's believed that those kinds of laws influenced other laws later overall. So that's something the Babylonians introduced to Mesopotamia and other parts of the world, which was the right of laws. And why were the laws important? Well, the laws were important because it promoted order and justice. There was an idea of equal justice, above the law and all that. Although y'all saw in the video how it depended on what your social standing was. So obviously the upper classes, had it better. They might get off with a fine or instead of something cut off or being killed. Seems like all the laws are, the punishments are either death, something gets cut off, or you get a fine, So they seem kind of harsh, at that time, but I'm sure they were already doing that already before this was even going on. And y'all saw in that little short video that women had some rights too, like they had the right to own some property, divorce, and bequeath things like in a will or whatever. So they did have some rights, women, more than later, they think. There were 6 other kings that came after Hammurabi died. Some were his sons and grandsons because he had a dynasty of kings, but they weren't that great. Hammurabi was their greatest ruler overall, and over time they got conquered by other people. There's like 2 different groups that came in that conquered them. One was the Hittites, which I'll talk about first. They came in. Then there was another group called the Kassites. So the fall of Babylon is kind of debated about when it was, but they think it happened sometime close to 1600 or right after 1600. And Babylon was sacked first by the Hittites, who were in Turkey, which I'll get to in a second. And then the Kassites, they're kind of a mystery group. The Kassites were some kind of Iranian people that came out of like Western Iran, where the Zagros Mountains are. It's like Western Iran. They actually would take over Babylon and rule it for like 400 years. And they're not sure who the Kassites were. It's kind of a big debate. They're not sure if they were a Semitic people or some kind of Indo-Aryan people. So they're kind of one of these isolated language groups that they can't figure out who they were. But some kind of Asiatic people, I guess, that came in and probably just took over for a short time. Later, the Assyrians will come in, next. They'll conquer Mesopotamia. They'll control it for, several hundred years more after that. And I'll get to the Neo-Babylonian Empire. There's another, like a second Babylonian one, which we'll get to later, which is under King Nebuchadnezzar. That one didn't last long, like 70-something years. All right, then, of course, you've got the Hittites that you've also got as well I need to talk about. And, oh, good morning. Hey, so, and I didn't see that one. But, so yeah, let me talk about the Hittites a little bit about them. Of course, Hittites are famous for their empire in what is ancient Turkey. They also began the so-called Iron Age. And the area of Turkey, which I'll put on the screen for you, ancient Turkey was called, actually, the name that they usually call it, which I believe is a Greek name, is Anatolia. I don't know if you've ever heard of that name being used. But that's basically the name. Anatolia is the ancient name for what they call Turkey. That's where the Hittites mostly started. Also, they were in like Syria as well. And the one thing about the Hittites, which they're very famous for, is that they started the Iron Age because they were seen as this first people that came in and began to smelt iron or iron ore. And a little background about the Hittites and who they were. I think I mentioned this already from Monday's lecture, but the Hittites were an Indo-European people. They think they may have originated in most likely Eastern Europe. They weren't from Turkey. I think the theory about the Hittites, as far as they know, is that they may have came out of the Ukraine, like the southern part of Ukraine, like maybe above the Black Sea. So that's likely what they think anyway, the origins of the Hittites. And they somehow migrated to Turkey and settled maybe close to 1600 BC is when they came in. And they had a capital, which I'll go back up, which was called Hattusas, which is up here. And which I think meant what the name meant. That they don't really call themselves Hittite. Hittite is the biblical name that you'll see in the Bible. The Bible calls them Hittites. The Israelites did and all that. They're actually called the Hatti. Like if you take out the I and you put an A, H-A-T-T-I, Hatti. That's what they call themselves. Now, I think that's Hattusa, I guess the people of Hatti, I guess, or people of the Hatti, I guess would be what it means, but or the city of the Hatti, and it's probably what it really means. So I guess Hittites would mean that too, but so yeah, they were known for settling there in that area, and then you can see they also expanded down into what is Syria at one point. It's where Aleppo is, and Carchemish, which is in Syria. They controlled that area as well. So that's like the bulk of the areas where the Hittites were. Yeah, they did come down and sack Babylon like close to 1600, but they didn't stay there. They went back into Turkey. And the Kassites who were over here came in and just took over. What else about them? Yeah, they peaked close to about 1200 BC, used the peak of their powers called the New Hittite Empire or Neo-Hittite Empire, because there's like a Bronze Age Hittite Empire and a Iron Age Empire. I think the Bronze Age one was called the Old Hittite Empire, and the Iron Age one was called the New Hittite Empire. And what they figured out was that they could smelt iron from iron ore. I think they believe I think that humans first figured out iron from meteorites that fell to the earth. And I don't know how they figured this out, but they figured out that they heated iron ore to 2,795 degrees Fahrenheit, that they could smelt it and make liquid iron out of it. And of course, make tools and weapons out of it. So they were the first to figure that out. And so, yeah, the Hittites were the first, I guess, major power or empire to possess, iron weapons in battle and things like that. And then from there, it was spread. And then, of course, what happened, because of that, the Hittites, helped start the Iron Age. Hittites were also a rival state to the Egyptian New Kingdom, like in Egypt, and their empire was coming up the coast to like Syria. And if you know about it, the Hittites and the Egyptians fought over Syria to control it, especially when Ramses the Great was the pharaoh, like in the late 13th century. I think they even signed a treaty with each other at one point. So they had like a different kinds of relationships together. So yeah, I just mentioned on the bottom here how they, of course, at one point had sacked Babylon and helped in the Babylonian Empire. Now, of course, the Hittites were around to about 1200 BC. And then what happened was they believed they were sacked and destroyed by some kind of Iron Age peoples that attacked Turkey that were called the Sea Peoples. They're kind of a mysterious type group. There was some kind of confederation of seafaring raiders that were in the Mediterranean region, and they possessed iron weapons. And you can see they attacked the Mediterranean, Cyprus. They went into like where Syria, Turkey is, and they even attacked Egypt as well. I think they believed that they helped cause the decline of the New Kingdom at that point. Hey, and anyway, so that's who the Sea Peoples were, and the Sea Peoples helped cause like the beginning of the what they call the so-called Bronze Age collapse that'll kind of come afterwards. You probably heard about the Minoans collapsing and all that. They collapsed after this period as well. Of course, who were they? Like the Sea Peoples, they're not really sure who they were. There's all kinds of theories, from the Philistines to the Greeks. I think even Herodotus claims that they were the Phrygians who settled in Turkey, but they're not sure about that. Well, I'm not sure, Savannah, about that myself. I'm not really a mineralogist or whatever. They probably use some kind of cauldrons using hot air, blowing carbon into it to create, which they do later in these huge vats that are called I think they usually call it a converter or something like that. Yeah. I think Henry Bessemer was famous for that, I know, in modern times. But anyway, so that's about enough about the Hittites. Let me go ahead and move on. So after the Hittites, they had another group, of course, that came in, which were, of course, so there's kind of debated about the Sea Peoples. They don't know where they came from. But, of course, you got the Assyrians that come in, who really one of the most famous people that conquer Mesopotamia in the later part of this period. And the Assyrian Empire, as they called it later, they were a Semitic state too, just like the Babylonians were, but they were located more in the northern part of Iraq, in Syria. And they developed mostly in what would be the upper part of the Tigris River basin. So that's about where they were. They started out as a Bronze Age culture, just like the Hittites were. And then sometime after 1200, they started emerging, as a type of Iron Age culture as well. It's believed that they originally started out as a city-state. It was called Ashur, also pronounced Assur as well, either way. And it later became one of their capitals. It was also like a religious center of the Assyrians. I'll talk about the gods later and all that later. And they were a dominant power for a long time. In fact, they pretty much were dominant for like 500-600 years that they control Mesopotamia. They also sacked Babylon, they think, too. You can see in the 13th century as well. So they were around quite a while. Overall, but the Syria that everybody knows about, and the one that's kind of seen as being real cruel in the Bible, the Israelites, the Jews hated the Syrians, thought they were a terrible people, and the so-called Assyria that we know about doesn't really get started until close to about the 8th century. 9th century is about when it kind of really not 8th, 9th century, really about around the 9th century. It's about when it is. And they call that the Neo-Assyrian Empire. And eventually they'll have their own capital that'll kind of emerge from that, which is called the capital of Nineveh, which is up in the northern part of Iraq and the upper Tigris River basin. And Tiglath-Pileser III, he was the guy that really started it, so-called Neo-Assyrian Empire. And you can see here, there's another slide right here showing it. Those are usually the dates for it. Usually 911 is when it gets started, and it goes down to about 609. It's kind of debated about when that was, about when it ended. Some say 612 is when it ended. And so for at least 300 years, you've got this Iron Age empire of the Assyrians that controls the region. Now, the Assyrians were famous for their military. They had one of the first great militaries in Mesopotamia, and their militaries were kind of copied by everybody. A lot of the different states later, like Persia, the Greeks, the Romans, all copied the Assyrians. And they were known for having different technologies, not just iron weapons. They had horse cavalry that was usually armored, war chariots. They even used like camels, believe it or not, to move like supplies around. They had a corps of engineers as well. They were masters of siege warfare. They were famous for inventing like battering rams, these siege towers that they would bring up to the walls of cities to basically destroy them. and take them. And so the Assyrians were masters of conquest, which is why they were in power so long. And all the males within Mesopotamia and other areas were also forced into conscription as well, to be drafted through their armies. Oh, one thing that they're famous for, I guess I don't have it in the slide, but I'll mention about it. I'll put it up on the screen. They are infamous for mass deportation of enemy populations. That's one thing that they're very, very famous for, the Assyrians. And whatever people they would conquer, they would take the best people back, like the best men, best women, all the best workers, the strongest men for the military, and so on. I think the most famous deportation they did, if you know about that, is that they deported the Israelites. You know about this from what is I think it was Sumeria. Yeah, Sumeria, and the Israelites, and Samaria was later conquered under, which I'll talk briefly about later. And I think when we especially get to talking about the Israelites and the history of the Jews, we'll get more into what happened to them. But they were one famous group that was deported back to Assyria. And some of the tribes became known as the so-called lost tribes of Israel, which you may have heard of. And several kings conquered Israel and eventually took it over time. So that's kind of what they're known for, the Assyrians, masters of, conquest and professional armies that kept them in power for several hundred years as a whole. Here's a map showing you. It's kind of a little small map there, but it kind of shows you like the different sizes of the empire. The empire mostly started in Iraq and what is Syria, and then over time you can see the new Assyrian Empire expanded to conquer like southern Mesopotamia down here, part of Turkey, Israel, and then actually at one point they did take over Egypt briefly. So, in fact, they were one of the first states to do that in the Near East, to control, both part of, I guess, Asia and Africa at the same time, like one of the very first empires. So anyway, so they were pretty powerful, the Assyrians. I'll talk about those rulers, Sargon, Ashurbanipal. Those are really the most famous rulers of the Neo or New Assyrian Empire. Of course, they were known for religion too as well. The Assyrians adopted a lot of the same gods as the Sumerians and Babylonians. So they were worshiping like the god Marduk, I told you about, which was the god of magic or in water, and other gods, Anu and other gods. I think they still had Shamash. Shamash was another god, of course, that went back to Sumerian times. They had that one too. Now, there was one god they had that was new called Ashur, A-S-H-U-R, or also spelled A-S-S-U-R. And Ashur was some kind of Assyrian war god. So they're a very warlike people, the Assyrians. And then they also had another god on the bottom named Ishtar. So I have over here a picture of Ishtar over here. Ishtar was also a war goddess that went back to the Sumerian times. Sumerians called her originally Inanna. Yeah, Inanna, which is right here. But Ishtar was also known as a fertility goddess. She was a goddess of fertility, sex, love, and she has been compared a lot to like other gods like Aphrodite, with the Greek, Roman gods, or Venus, and then also the goddess Isis in Egypt. I think maybe that god may have influenced those other goddesses later as a whole. There's a picture of her, usually standing on top of some lions. So anyway, now who are some famous rulers? There's Sargon II. He's, of course, very famous ruler who lived At the end of the 8th century BC, Sargon, of course, was the one that founded what became known later as the Sargonid dynasty. It was a dynasty of Assyrian kings that ruled in the 8th and the 7th centuries. And I think it had like 6 kings in it. Three of them were famous. Sargon II, Sennacherib, who was one of his sons. And then he had a grandson named Ashurbanipal. He was also very famous as well. And so under him, this is like considered the period where Syrian power is at its peak overall. And Sargon was believed to have been a son of Tiglath-Pileser III, the king I think I told you about before. I believe that was one of his sons. So they would be in power for quite a while, 100-something years, his dynasty, Sargon. Sargon's mostly known for expanding the empire, like conquering, I think, down into like Babylonia and into part of Turkey. And he and his father are pretty much the ones that conquered like part of Israel, like Samaria, and all the Israelite tribes were, basically deported. Then, of course, there's one more king I'll mention that's real famous, which is, of course, Ashurbanipal, who might be considered to be one of their greatest kings. He lived in the mid-7th century BC. And Ashurbanipal was considered one of the very few kings, by the way, that was illiterate. A lot of the kings were, for some reason, couldn't read and write very well, at least in the cuneiform they were still using at the time. He was known for his conquests. Under Ashurbanipal, they conquered down to Egypt and expanded the state as a whole. And then he expanded Nineveh. He built a lavish palace at Nineveh. And one thing that Ashurbanipal became very famous for was his construction of a library that was built there at Nineveh, their capital, which was called different names. I think they commonly call it the Royal Library of Ashurbanipal, which was part of his palace complex. It was considered, by the way, the first major library built in the ancient world. It was used to house all kinds of tablets on records and information in Mesopotamia, which I forget the number exactly. It varies on the amount of tablets that they think it may have compiled, but I believe it's somewhere between 20 to 30,000 tablets have been found, or may have been found there at one point. And it's at that library that they found a complete edition of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was in 12 tablets. They do think the library influenced the Greek one in Egypt, which was the Library of Alexandria, because when Alexander the Great conquered Mesopotamia, he found the ruins of it and was so influenced by it, he built his own library. So they have actually rebuilt part of, I think, Ashurbanipal's palace there, which I think that may have been done under, I think Saddam Hussein may have done that in the 1980s, tried to rebuild part of it or something like that. Now, what happened to the Assyrian Empire? Well, after he died, Ashurbanipal, he had 2 other kings that followed, like his son and grandson ruled. However, a revolt or civil war within his empire caused the Assyrian Empire to collapse in close to about 610, 612. They think it's about when the Assyrian Empire collapsed. So it was around for a few hundred years. It was probably one of the mightiest empires, to control Mesopotamia at one point, especially before the Persians came in. That, by the way, is just a gate that's left over from what is the city of Nineveh. Nineveh is located close to the city of Mosul, which is in northern Iraq. That's just like one of the gate entrances into it. Probably had several of those that were built, but most of it's like in ruins or been destroyed. I think ISIS, if you know what ISIS over there, in Iraq. They may have destroyed part of it or something like that at one point. All right, then you have, of course, one other power that would come in later, the last one I'll talk about, which is the Chaldeans. We're all called Neo-Babylonians or Neo-Babylonian state. That'll emerge next. And what was this exactly? Well, I've got a map showing you of this state. It's often called Neo-Babylonian Empire or New Babylonian Empire. It was very short-lived. I think it was around for like 74 years. It only had 4 rulers. As you can see, it was a vast empire that stretched from Iraq, Syria, Israel, and all the way to part of Egypt at one point. And it actually controlled Egypt a little bit as well. And it's often called different names. Chaldean Empire, Chaldean Babylonia, Neo-Babylonian, New Babylonian. Why do they call it that name? Well, this was a rebuilt Babylonian state that emerged in southern Iraq, the area of Babylonia. And so hence historians gave it a nickname later, Neo or New Babylonian. They did this so people wouldn't be confused about the old Babylonian Empire of Hammurabi, which is totally separate, from each other, especially historical times. And the actual king that founded it was King Nabopolassar. He was the father of what is King Nebuchadnezzar. And King Nebuchadnezzar, was their greatest king. He was their, of course, reigning longest king overall. He reigned for something like 40, 50 years. So he's one of the longest reigning kings of Mesopotamia as a whole. And by the way, this state, which you see down here, didn't last very long, 74 years, was considered one of the last Semitic empires that would control Mesopotamia overall. Now, what was Nebuchadnezzar known for? Well, at least 3 things, I guess. First of all, he rebuilt Babylon. So he rebuilt the city, he rebuilt the walls around the city, which they think Babylon at one point may have been one of the largest cities in the world at the time. Let me look it up real quick here, but they think that Babylon may have been one of the first cities to have, I think it's close to 200,000 people may have lived there at one point. It was a very huge city. I had some stats on that, on the size of it at one point. It was pretty big in size. But, he also built a great palace with it that was part of the city as well. And then also a lot of the gates were constructed by him, which let me go down to here where I've got it. He built this famous gate you may have heard of called the Ishtar Gate, which honored the goddess Ishtar. Of course, they've built replicas of it like this one here. That's in one of the ruins of ancient Babylon in Iraq. And actually, I think the original one is right here, which they think some German archaeologists, I want to say in the 1800s, took it back to Germany and they put it back together. So that's what they think it looked like at one point. But that's something that he may have built, Ashurbanipal. And then, of course, everybody's heard already about the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Of course, he may have built that ziggurat, which I told you already may have been one of the 7 wonders of the world, according to the Greeks. And was originally a ziggurat, I told you, that was built for one of his queens. It was, I think, from Iran or something like that. And what was her name? Queen Amytis. I think her name was Amytis. And he was trying to, she felt lonely for her homeland. Here's right here. Amytis, I guess they spell it also as well. But so he built this lavish ziggurat. And I told you how they built, trees and greenery and waterfalls on it. And it was considered one of the 7 wonders, according to the Greeks. But later it collapsed during, they think, Alexander the Great's time, around the 4th century. The other thing that he's known for, of course, Nebuchadnezzar is known for, of course, sacking what is Judah and Jerusalem, which was the capital of the kingdom of Judah. The Assyrians had already conquered like the northern kingdom around about 722 BC. They believed that Judah, after the war, had been kind of like this vassal state to Assyria that kind of survived down to Nebuchadnezzar's time. And what happened, the reason why Judah got conquered was Judah at the time in the 6th century had become an ally of Egypt. And so this angered the Babylonians. And so Nebuchadnezzar laid siege to it multiple times. You can see there. Actually, it took him 3 times, 605, 597, and in 586, he eventually conquered it. And he forced the people of Judah, later called Jews, as you know, to go into captivity in Babylon. They were kind of deported like the Assyrians did and brought back there. And there's several prophets in the Bible that mention about this. Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Daniel, all have books, of course, that discuss the conquest of Judah under Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah, he was considered a cruel conqueror, Nebuchadnezzar. And the book of Daniel, though, is considered one of the most famous ones that describes Nebuchadnezzar's reign overall. And but they do think the Babylonian captivity influenced the Jews later to write and compile parts of the Bible. So I guess that was kind of an important history later period in history overall, you know. So that's basically, you know, the bulk of what happened to with the Neo-Babylonians. He had two, like a son, I think grandson that reigned later, but they weren't very good. And basically there was a more powerful empire in the east that was the Persian Empire. That's in Iran. They're going to come in. They're going to conquer the region. The Persian Empire is going to eventually conquer most of the Near East, from Iran all the way to Turkey, Iraq, Syria, Israel, Egypt. And that empire will be even greater than any empire that was, you know, in Mesopotamia. And we'll talk about the Persians later. I think I'm going to separate them for later, because I'm going to move on later to talk about Egypt. And then I'll get into some of the minor stuff for later. So for now, that's the bulk of the lecture material on Mesopotamia. How much time we have? We have a few minutes left, I guess. I can go ahead and I can review real quick over the study guide questions that, of course, I've got there for you. If you have any questions, let me know. As I'm, you know, reviewing over the study guide, you can send me a message if you want. And then later, if you don't forget, you can send me comments later or questions through my YouTube channel. And you get bonus points for that. You know, some of y'all forget about that, but some of y'all aren't taking advantage of that for some reason. But just think of some kind of question or whatever, or some kind of comment you want about the lecture. Who are the Babylonians? The Babylonians, like I told you, were a Semitic people that conquered Mesopotamia, like in southern Iraq, Babylonia. And they were made up of peoples like the Amorites and the Akkadians. This is after the Akkadian Empire collapsed in Iraq. And they developed around the city of Babylon and like Euphrates Valley. And of course, their famous king was King Hammurabi. His empire has got all kinds of names: Old Babylonian Empire, Paleo Babylonian Empire as a whole. And it's around from about the 18th to about the 16th century. But 18 to 1600 is about BC is about when it was around. Hammurabi was like one of 12 kings, and I told you Hammurabi was their greatest king, and the one that, of course, that developed the famous Code of Hammurabi or Hammurabi Code. And of course, you saw in the video of Hammurabi Code was considered the first major legal law code system that was developed in the world. And it influenced a lot of law codes later, like in the Bible, modern codes later. And I kind of gave you examples of codes and all of that. How many laws were developed? About 282 were carved onto that stone pillar or steel that y'all saw in the Louvre. What was the principle of retaliation, or an eye for an eye? It's called lex talionis. I don't know if you have to know that, but it's a Latin term which means law of retaliation. It's the idea of equal justice. If somebody did something to you, you had a right to do something to them according to the laws. And y'all saw some of these, gave you examples where it might be a deal where you break somebody's bone in their arm and you get to break theirs, that kind of deal. But it didn't always work out like that. You saw it because of, social standings and all that. Then we talked about the Hittites. The Hittites were these Indo-European peoples in Turkey that were from, they think, Eastern Europe, like Ukraine. They sacked Babylon close to 1600. And you have the Kassites that came in too. The origin of the Hittites, the Hittites, I told you, may have been European peoples, some kind of Indo-European peoples. They think they came out of maybe southern Ukraine, right above the Black Sea. And they settled around Anatolia, which is what they call central Turkey in ancient times. Tussis. I got that already. We did that one. What new technology was first mass produced by the Hittites? Of course, iron. They were the first to develop iron technology, iron weapons, iron tools. So I told you, took a pretty, hot temperature to smelt it. And that led to the Iron Age. But it was only short-lived. Like Hittite Empire or Neo-Hittite Empire, it's not around very long, 100-something years. And they got conquered, but you saw it by the Sea Peoples. That were kind of mysterious. I don't know who those people were. Still kind of a mystery. Then you have the Assyrians that came in. The Assyrians were a Semitic people that developed in northern Iraq and Syria. They developed the Assyrian Empire. And the Assyrian Empire went through different stages. And mostly it's known for its, new or Neo-Assyrian Empire, which would conquer most of Mesopotamia, Syria, and then push into Egypt at one point. They're named for a city that is in the northern part of Iraq along the Tigris River Basin, which is called Ashur. And Ashur was originally their capital, and it became like a religious center for their different gods that they worshipped. And I told you some of the chief gods they worshiped, besides the ones that were already there, were you had the god Ashur, which is, or Assur, A-S-S-U-R, A-S-H-U-R, told you about. And then you also had another god I told you about that became real famous called Ishtar. And Ishtar was originally a Sumerian goddess that went back to the time of the Sumerians, originally called Inanna. And she was a fertility goddess, but she was also a war goddess as well. Why were they cruel conquerors? They were known for their mass armies that used iron weapons. And so they are known for new technologies as a military. Like I told you how they were great at siege warfare, had armored cavalry, corps of engineers. They invented the battering ram. They also invented like siege towers to take cities. And then also they were known for like mass deportations of whole populations, like they did the Israelites, like in Samaria. So the Neo-Assyrian Empire was the peak empire or Iron Age empire of the Assyrians, which lasted from about 911 to close to 610 or so. So about 300 years, the Neo-Assyrian Empire. And its capital, which is down here, was Nineveh. It became more important. It was also pretty big too. I think both Nineveh and Babylon had populations that were six figures. I don't know if it was 200,000, but it was at least 100 to 200,000 range. A lot of these cities that were sprouting up in Mesopotamia. And Nineveh was around to about 610 when it was eventually sacked. Famous rulers of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. I guess the ones I want you to know about the most are Sargon II. Sargon was a 8th century Assyrian ruler that was famous for the Sargonid dynasty, which was a famous dynasty of Assyrian kings, which I think I told you had about, I think I said 6 of them in them, I believe, or whatever. And then the other one I told you about was Ashurbanipal. He was a 7th century BC Assyrian ruler. He may have been one of their greatest kings. He was definitely their last greatest king, Ashurbanipal. Ashurbanipal was the one that was known for building a famous library at Nineveh, often called the Royal Library of Nineveh or Royal Library of Ashurbanipal. And it influenced other libraries later, like the Library of course, of Alexandria. Then lastly, we talk about the Chaldeans. Chaldeans were a Semitic people, also of Babylonia as well. And kind of a debate about their origins, Chaldeans. But the Chaldeans were a Semitic people that formed the Neo or New-Babylonian Empire, which formed in the 7th century BC. It's also called the Chaldean Empire. The H is silent. They don't pronounce it. Who is their greatest ruler? King Nebuchadnezzar II, who's in the Bible, probably one of the greatest figures in the Bible at that time that you read about. And he was known for his building projects, like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. He built the Ishtar Gate. That's not in the study guide, but I would know about the Ishtar Gate for sure. And then, of course, he's also known for his conquest of Judah and their capital city of Jerusalem. He destroyed the Temple of Solomon, which I guess I'll talk about later when I get to the Israelites. But it was destroyed close to 587 range or 586 when it was destroyed. There's multiple books that talk about, in the Old Testament about his reign. Of course, the most famous is the book of Daniel, but also Ezekiel and also Jeremiah are also books that cover his reign also as well. So anyway, did anybody else have any questions about the lecture today in the review? I don't see anything. Anybody put any questions up on the screen for me or anything like that? I think there's only one comment I saw, which Savannah had about iron. That's kind of a debate about how they did that, but now they use they would pump carbon into it to, create iron and steel to make, heat it up, I guess, with that, and they would make tools out of it. And then they'd have to hammer it out into whatever kind of form. Like blacksmiths would mostly do that overall. And, but yeah, I guess they must have had some kind of equipment, some kind of mask and gloves to do that. I don't know if they really know exactly about that, but yeah, I'm sure like today, like with the later Bessemer process that developed in the 1800s and all that. But anyway, so I don't think I have any other questions up, but, send me questions, comments, about the lecture later, what you thought about it and all of that. I guess since I was able to finish Mesopotamia, I'll try to have a quiz on Mesopotamia for y'all next week on Monday. We don't have class Monday next week. That's Labor Day holiday. So I'll post some kind of announcement with that. With an assignment about Mesopotamia. So that's it for today. Reminder though, before y'all go, don't forget about the Canvas quiz number 1. That's on prehistory. That's in quizzes. It's due next Monday, which I believe is September 7th. So go to quizzes and finish that. I will send you out reminders this week about it, about completing it. Also, don't forget, if anybody else has a book in mind for their book report, send that to me, email that to me whenever you can. And also, if anybody's still interested in the Veterans Oral History Project, let me know about that. Email me, Let me know if you want to sign up for that. So that's it for this morning. I'll be back up on 1 p.m. For another stream. You don't have to be there for you because you saw this one, but you can go back and look at that stream too as well if you want as well. So y'all take care. Hope y'all are safe. I'll see y'all next week. So take care.